My name's Ytasha Womack, and this is Leon Q. Hello, Leon.
Hey, how you doing, Ytash?
Welcome to Carnegie Hall's um, fantastic affair where we're getting an opportunity to talk about the joys of salsa music, samba music, rumba music. And I'm especially happy to be discussing this one because I'm sharing this, being in dialogue with my cousin, Leon Q, who is a trumpet player. He plays all genres, but he also has a special affinity for Latin music. And I'm excited to be speaking as well because we are celebrating the debut of this book, The Afrofuturist Evolution, written by yours truly. Uh, and I'm just happy because I talked about my relationship with dance and rhythm, and my connection with Latin music played a big role in my evolution as a dancer and in my experience of being able to talk about Afrofuturism. So, Afrofuturism broadly is a way of thinking about the future or alternate realities, but doing so from Black cultural perspectives. Here today, we are celebrating Latin music here in the US, as celebrated with Carnegie Hall. And uh, I just think it's very special that both Leon and myself are African American artists, creatives who found a new way of expressing ourselves by connecting with Latin rhythms, um, many of which have deep ties to the rhythms that came out of different spaces in the African continent. And so, with that, I was going to start off with a passage very quickly. Leon, who I also call Quincy. So if I call him that, you guys will know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, that's me.
so this passage is from a section in the book that is called a rhythm and dance, and I tried my darndest to write about dance and try to create that experience. So dance is embodied deliberation. The purpose is remembering our oneness, our shared existence with one another, and the shared path we have as humans on this earth plane. The purpose is to experience shared joy, liberation, and deep connectivity as one. The connection is deemed as liberating, and liberation is a reminder of our connection. The experience is awareness, and we become aware of our cosmic identity, that which connects us biologically and experientially to all around us. Yay!
Dig it.
um, but with that, I want to ask you, Leon, how you first became engaged in the world of Latin music.
Well, honestly, I've been engaged with it probably my entire life, particularly in an acute manner where I began a course of study. Began when I started playing trumpet about 35 years ago. And then it went to another level when I got into college and I ended up um, playing or getting the opportunity to work um, within the Latin community in Chicago, is where we're from. And the rest is kind of history. It just took off from there. You know.
And what was it about the music that that I guess you connected with so deeply?
Well, it was a couple of things. One, I always, well, ever since I started studying jazz, and they would put pieces of music in front of me that would say, okay, this is a Latin. But what's a Latin? For so many years, um, as you learn, you kind of assume that, okay, well, whatever the guy is saying, we're going to play our interpretation of what we think the composer wants. Until I got to the point to where as I started noticing that Latin music is so diverse. Because when you speak about Latin music, you not only have to speak about the countries where the music manifested, but when you're speaking about Afro Latin music, you also have to talk about the countries where the rhythms originated from and how they transferred into the countries or into the environments that they ended up manifesting in and evolving. So, so that was one big part of it. So then this whole concept of Latin music became, so diverse. It opened up a brand new world for me to the point to whereas I was getting on professors' nerves and getting on certain people in high places' nerves, and they say, okay, we're going to play this as a Latin. Well, what country does it come from? Where did it originate? Are you seeking this? Are you saying that? Or did it come from this country? Did it come from that nation? That deal. And then what ended up happening was is as I started getting around musicians from Latin American countries and they started showing me the ropes, then that's how I developed an acute knowledge and as well as an acute desire to continue to learn um, the technical, the philosophical, the historical, and the aesthetics of Latin music.
Great. I think for myself, I was always, I started dancing early on, and I come from a family of people who are steppers. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so coming out of Chicago, stepping is a partner dance, very popular in African American communities, and so, to me, it's like, okay, I come from a family, they're stepping well. And sometimes they would also do the cha-cha. And so for me as a kid looking at, family members doing this partner dance, it's like, oh, okay, well, it would be really cool to learn salsa as well. I grew up in, taking formal dance lessons, ballet, tap, um, just broadly African dance. You're in the pom pom team. And when I was taking tap lessons at Mayfair Academy in Chicago, some of the some of the songs that we would dance to would be either it was like Latin fusion, or sometimes there would be these drum solos that were heavily percussive, kind of coming from Latin jazz. So sometimes we would dance to jazz, and we would dance to Latin jazz. And tap dancing to those kinds of rhythms really makes you acutely rhythmic. And when I, came out of, as I was in college and coming out of college, I said, well, I need to take actual dance lessons and just learn the basics of salsa. And that's when I started taking some lessons at the Hot House and being a part of the scene. And that it really opened up a world for me. And then I had this experience where, I thought I could kind of salsa dance. And I had this experience, which ironically, at a family reunion. I don't know if you recall the family reunion we had in Las Vegas. I'm not sure if you were at that one.
No, I wasn't at the Vegas one. I missed it because I was out on tour.
Okay, well, how exciting. um, but that particular reunion, they had a National Salsa Congress
Oh
at
yeah,
the hotel.
yeah.
And so I had this experience. I was very proud of myself. I thought I was a decent salsa dancer. I thought I caught on really fast, and then I had this experience. Uh, let's see, where is it? Oh no, I might have to look a bit. Oh wait, I found it here. So I'll read this passage from this lovely book, the Afrofuturist Evolution:
All
Creative
right.
Paths to Self-Discovery, which Leon happens to be in as well. And I'll just read this passage to you. One year, my family reunion took place in Las Vegas, a great locale for a family reunion, by the way. The
Well,
reunion was in the same hotel as the National Salsa Convention. And after the family festivities, a few of us wandered over to the convention after party. The music was amazing. The dancers were swirling with style and finesse, An unassuming gentleman in a white t shirt, dark slacks, and a white baseball cap approached me. And gentleman conjecture, he asked me to dance. Then he asked, was I a one or a two? And I had no idea what he was talking about.
Ooh.
I don't even know how we began. I was waiting for the musical and one, a Pratt he seemed completely oblivious to. He didn't wait for me to get into position, nor did he do some dramatic step forward to ensure that I stepped back as assurance that we were all in sync. All I know is I was suddenly spinning, trying to keep up, but I was a wiggling larva in outer space. I was lost. His fluid moves were all elegance and funk, finding ebbs and flows within bass counts I couldn't identify. He
Mm.
was dancing salsa, I was dancing salsa, but it's like we were moving on two different planetary levels. I don't think we were even dancing to the same music. What count is he on? Was the question flashing like a neon sign in my mind. Seeking stability in a comet of dance motions, I dove for the 8 count ground floor in his moves, and there was none. How is this possible? So, with that, what I came to realize is that there is such thing as a one or a two, and that kind of points to some rhythms that I want us to talk about today. And so, can you break down that one and two difference that this gentleman was referring to?
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting that we talk about that because as a musician, with the type of music that you're talking about, salsa, which actually the aesthetic of salsa comes from what we call son cubano in Oriente de Cuba, in Santiago de Cuba, which is in the east of the island. Okay. Um, the concept of one and two actually revolves around the clave and some of the patterns that are played around the clave would start on various beats. So when you're dancing on one, and they call it salsa dancing, but it's really what we call either guarachando, like son guaracha, or in Western Cuba, in Occidente, in Havana, um, they call it casino, which was a dance of the casino. So when it comes to one, that means that when the music drops, the very first beat, you're taking your first step. Okay. Now, when you are dancing, the rhythms can fluctuate and can have different permeations. For example, if you're in marcha abajo, which means that your timbalero is playing in cascara, well, he's playing the beats to accent the clave. But on beat one, you're always taking a step, and then you're coming back. Beat one, you're taking a step, you're coming back. Beat two actually functions as it lines up directly with the clave itself because in certain aspects of the music, the rhythms lock up kind of like this. So you got a whole bunch of things going on, but at some certain point, they're going like boop, ba 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 ba, boop, ba 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 ba. They can do this thing, then they link up, then they go back out. And if someone is a two, that means they start dancing on beat two of either the measure or in the phrase of the music.
And some
So
of you, oh, go ahead.
no, as you were saying.
Well, and some of you are like, whoa, this sounds so complicated. But what I came to realize is that salsa music, a lot of the foundation is on a clave beat or a clave
Absolutely.
count.
Absolutely.
And could you just explain to everyone what a clave count is, Leon?
Okay. So clave in Spanish means key. Um, Now there's another word for key that says llave. So that's like the key to, open the door. But if they say clave, that means the key that locks the rhythms together in the music. And the clave can be played in a myriad of ways. So the original clave is what we call the 6/8 clave, the 6 por ocho. Okay, 6/8. And that would go pop, 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 pop. So basically, it would be it feels like what some people would call an African six, okay, over a span of two measures with four beats apiece, which would be the eight, right? Or it would be, or over a series of eighth notes. What ended up happening as time progressed, you've got the 6/8 clave, and then the 6/8 clave ended up becoming what we call the 3/2 clave. And what ended up happening was is with the 3/2 clave, it went from pop, 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 pop. It ended up kind of like squaring up because the music ended up going from like a 6/8 pattern, which is traditionally West African, to more of a 4/4 beat aligned in what we call cut time, which is actually not four quarter notes in the measure, but two half notes. And then what happens is you're playing what we call 3/2, and it goes from pop, 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 pop to this. Pop, 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 pop. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it goes like that, right? But at the same time, if you flipped it backwards, then you have what's called 2/3, which starts with two and ends with three, and it goes like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, the same way that you play that, it also applies to certain aspects of what we call salsa here in the States, which is a combination of many rhythms that fit together in order to make great music. There's also the rumba side of it. And in Cuban style rumba, they play the clave just a little different with a little bit of hesitation. And that hesitation actually comes from the original roots of the rhythms, which come from the Yoruba Empire, particularly southwestern Nigeria, Togo, Benin, because they will always have a little push. So if you're playing, let's say, 3/2 son clave, which is evident in the son Cubano music of Santiago, which ended up becoming salsa, the rumba clave gave it a little bit of extra push to it. So son clave 3/2 is this: 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 3/2 rumba is this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Push 1, 2. So as the music evolved, what it did was is it had these series of rhythms that interrelated with each other with one basic form, and then all of the rest of the instruments would perform around it in an effort to make sure that each rhythm interlocked with each other at a certain point to let you know where you were within the beat.
Well, and so what's fun is that listening to the music, it's really exciting. Of course, you can move in all kinds of ways. But if you're actually dancing salsa or you're doing rumba, understanding that clave is the basis becomes a really big deal, because for a lot of people in the West, when we're dancing, we're really accustomed to 4/4 measure, or if you're trained in dance, you just count in eight. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so you're just kind of hitting those beats, and there could be beats in between them. But our foundation is kind of this idea of counting to eight or counting to four, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Even if it's a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, it's still operating in the sets of four.
Mhm.
But when you're dancing salsa or you're dancing rumba, as Leon mentioned, the foundation is not this four count. The foundation is the clave, the 2/3 or the 3/2. And there's a hesitation. Those beats are not equally measured. And so
Yeah, it can
that's
get that
the
way sometimes.
right. And so it's so someone could say, oh, it's 3/2. So they would think, all right, so it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And it's like, no, 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 no. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Getting kind of close.
All right.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Or if it's rumba, 1, 2, push, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Kind of like that.
Okay. It's easier to follow.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um, so I break all that down because what I realized is we can listen to, coming up and listening like blues and R&B and a lot of hip hop. Uh, we're what we don't, and even just Western pop music. It's all kind of based off of the same foundation,
Uh-huh.
which is not clave count.
Hmm.
And so we can get into spaces where we assume music is supposed to fall in a certain way and you're supposed to move in a certain way. And then when you have a different foundation rhythmically, then how you're interacting with your partner, how you're dancing, you're dancing over a completely different rhythm set. And it can literally seem like two different universes of rhythms.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean they don't overlap, doesn't mean they're not related, but it's two different ways of engaging.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've just found that to be really fascinating and exciting as a dancer. Because for me, dancing to one versus dancing to another, they're two different experiences. Um,
Yes. Yes.
and it made me think about the fact that there's different lessons and insights into rhythm that are unlocked by moving to these rhythms or playing these rhythms or listening to them, that has to be experienced.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering for you, like when you think about playing, say, R&B or blues versus playing salsa and rumba, experientially, when you think about the different rhythm sets, what is there a different feeling for you, or um,
Well, surprisingly, yes. But what I've discovered is that clave is so strong that clave actually integrated itself into African American music. So if
that's
I'm
what I
playing,
realized too.
yes. Well, when you think about the history of jazz, okay, who brought the rhythm in? Very simple. There were Cuban-born slaves that were traded or found themselves leaving Cuba and ending up in New Orleans because Havana and New Orleans were like sister cities in the slave trade. There was a bunch of business going on between the two. Okay. So in Cuba, because of the Spanish influence in it, Spanish is so close to Africa, so they kind of knew what was going down anyway, and they were kind of lenient as to um, allowing the African slaves to play the rhythms that they brought over and integrate them into like the Spanish scene with the Spanish guitars and the flutes and all of that stuff, and then the indigenous influence. Well, the same thing happened in New Orleans, but there were there were native Cubans, okay, that directly came from Africa to Cuba and then started populating families. But then there were Cubans of Haitian descent. So while this crazy thing was going on between New Orleans and Havana, the same thing was happening with Port-au-Prince. Port-au-Prince was sending slaves to Havana. They would send them to New Orleans. All the drums and the rhythms came with them. And by the time you got to the 1900s, where to where it's like even during the slave trade, the slaves in New Orleans had masters that let them take Sunday off. Some of the slaves went to church, and some of the slaves went and hung out with other slaves in places like Congo Square, okay, in New Orleans, and they started experimenting with this music, and the clave got integrated into it, and the next thing you know, you have jazz, where the first form of jazz was actually the parade music that we call the second line that happens in New Orleans, which is almost completely based off clave, even though the swing was slightly different because of the influence and the expression, okay, but the clave was always integrated. So when I play, let's say, rock music, or if I play R&B music, or if I play, if I play certain aspects of jazz music, some way, somehow, if I hear that clave, it gives me an experience that ties me back to the foundations of our music from a cultural perspective historically.
No, that makes so much sense. So for so I was a part of the Carnegie Hall's Afrofuturism Fest, and we put together um, the we put together a lineup of Afrofuturist performers, and I had an opportunity to talk to the head of the Afro Latin Orchestra. Um, and the Arturo, and he was saying that he had actually spoken to Machito, the great Machito, uh,
Machito.
yes, about clave.
Oh
And
yeah.
so because I was asking, what's the deeper symbolism of clave? And he was saying that in talking to Machito, Machito said that it's about respect.
True.
And essentially, it's just another way of counting time.
Yes.
So, one of the things that I like to remind people about when I talk about Afrofuturism and dance is that, all cultures have a relationship to space and time. And dance is a relationship to space and time. You are moving in a space to a set of rhythms. And as such, you become this sort of interdimensional entity because you're having a space-time experience because you are in fact dancing to music. And I would say the same thing goes if you're actually playing music or you are
Ooh.
experiencing music. So these are all space-time dynamics and so many lessons within them. But naturally, because we don't associate with dance as being this sort of space-time dynamic or music in totality, but I feel like when you're engaging with these rhythms, sometimes they're sacred rhythms or rhythms with insights. Certainly rhythms that can bring joy and solace and comfort and excitement.
Oh
And I,
yes.
and I really appreciate the insight that you provided, Leon, because you were demonstrating that while certain rhythms may have been preserved in one area a little more than another, there's been so
Like
much
you
overlap.
like you wouldn't believe. The thing
Mm-hmm.
is that most people don't many people cannot detect the overlapping until they actually learn about it, they investigate and they research it. And over time, as they continue on the quest to learn about that overlapping, then they discover it and then they can actually hear it, they can detect it, and they can groove with it.
And it opens up a whole world. Um,
Yes.
it is a complete deep dive. When I started salsa dancing, it took me into this experience of wanting to learn the music. I started, I got into it in the period when you could buy a lot of CDs. So I was buying CDs, I was trying to study the genres, I was trying to learn the artists, almost like retroactively trying to catch up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what becomes very funny is in this attempt to catch up, the retroactively, it's like you experience the kind of history that you may or may not have quite been present for.
Ah, true.
And those overlaps transform and become very enlightening. So to be a person who can, dance salsa, dance rumba, do merengue, do samba,
Oh
and
yeah.
also, to be able to freestyle the house music or do hip hop dance or modern and modern jazz, contemporary, tap. It's the insights from these rhythms have really transformed me, and it's something that I try to share some of this community building through Afrofuturist experience dance workshops. Um,
Absolutely.
so we talked about samba. No, we
Mhm.
didn't talk about samba. Let's talk a little
We
bit about samba.
oh sure, absolutely.
Can you talk a bit about maybe some of the basic rhythms of samba?
Okay. So when we're talking about samba, we're still talking about music that has definitely a dynamic and primitive, or what I would say um, strong roots in African music. Now, when we're talking about, like, let's say when we're talking about Cuban music or the music of the Hispanic Caribbean, the reason why it's so strong in the clave is because of the influence of where the people came from. So a lot of people came from West Africa. A lot of people came from the Yoruba Empire, which is Nigeria, basically Southwest Nigeria, Togo, and Benin. But when we're talking about samba, that's Brazil. Now, the cool thing about Brazil is that Brazil is one of the nations on the map that is closest, um, one of the Latin nations that's closest in proximity to the African continent. When it comes to samba, the roots of that music actually come from South Central Africa. Okay, actually Southwest Central Africa. A lot of it comes from Angola, which Angola is the southwestern tip of Africa, very close to you know, Benin. I'm sorry, Namibia to the north, South Africa to the south, Botswana and a bunch of other countries to the east, the Atlantic to the west. Well, they played music that was based off of what we call the heartbeat as musicians. Boom, 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 boom. And that original music was called samba, Semba. And by the time it got to Brazil, it ended up changing and becoming samba. But by that time, you had this mixture that was developing of this heartbeat rhythm, the percussion that they were using in Angola. And then what happened was is you had Portuguese guitarists that were playing rhythms. You had indigenous musicians that were playing indigenous instruments, for instance, flutes. And then, a very prominent instrument in samba is the cuica. It sounds like that. It sounds like it sounds like the low pitched dog and the high pitched dog. It's like, okay, what's this about, right? Well, so samba's roots are actually more in Angola, so more in the southern part of the continent, and that's why the music sounds the way that it does. Now, your basis of samba, one of the primary rhythms that you'll hear outside of the heartbeat, boom, 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 boom. You will hear a rhythm, which is a primary rhythm of samba called partido alto. Partido alto. So partido alto is basically the counter rhythm to the heartbeat. So when you had that boom, 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 boom. And it's kind of difficult to do, but when it locks in together, it's ridiculous. So you had this boom bop boom bop 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 boom bop 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 boom bop 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 boom bop 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 boom bop 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 bop, so on and so forth. And so those rhythms actually interplay. They interplay, whereas they'll come off of the heartbeat, but then ended up linking into the heartbeat. And that's kind of like one of the of biggest bases of samba. And that ended up translating into um the different deviations of samba, whether you're playing traditional samba, whether you're playing pagode, whether you're playing batucada, or if you're going into the jazz samba where you're doing like samba funk, or you're doing bossa nova, or you're doing all of those things. So yeah, that's what's going on with that.
Awesome. And I think when I'm working with teenagers, samba is a little tough for them because of the speed.
Well, it all depends on how fast you go.
Well,
Um,
precisely. Well, yeah. Well, obviously, a lot of samba songs they might start off slow, and then they get faster and faster and faster. And
Depends.
the dance itself is really a footwork kind of dance.
Yes.
But your torso, you're really part of your energy is pulling upwards as a dancer. From your core, you're pulling up, and then at the same time, because there's this intense footwork, Your knees aren't
Hmm.
really bent. Your thighs are pretty much kind of staying together.
Hmm.
And so then there's this energy that's sort of pulling down at the same time.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people always have fun doing that dance because it can become a question of endurance.
Major endurance. Samba, if you want to get a workout, start dancing samba. Um,
Yes.
and the thing is when it comes to samba, there is a male way and there is a female way of a female way of dancing samba. And some people just dance kind of like the female way, which is more the tradition here in the US. But then in Brazil, they have a step that only the males do, and that's called the carioca. And the carioca is a step that came from Rio de Janeiro. Of course, when they the slang term for people from Rio, they call them cariocas. And cariocas, they have this step which is crazy. I can do it. I wish I could demonstrate it now, but it's kind of crazy, and it's kind of crazy. But with the carioca step, it's something to whereas once you learn how to do it, you'll never forget it. But you better be prepared for a cardio workout.
Yeah, lots of energy. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of salsa scene coming out of like New York and going across the states that was in part evolved out of a lot of Puerto Rican musicians and artists who were, of course, in Puerto Rico and then coming into, New York and the proliferation of jazz, a lot of Latin jazz, really a lot of the home for that is also New York. And I was wondering if you could just talk a bit about that too.
Oh, well, sure. So first and foremost, um, the term salsa and the music thereof has its roots distinctly the primary roots are Cuban roots, which of course is son cubano, rumba guaguancó, cha-cha-cha, charanga from Central Cuba, from Camagüey and from Florida, the charanga, um, which basically is you got son cubano. Okay, you got son cubano as the start in the east. You got rumba in the west, right? But then as it got into the center, they started messing around, and then they started variating till it became charanga, and then from charanga it became guaracha. By the time it hit Havana and started getting big, it was a casino music, so all this stuff was happening. Well, the thing is that not only were the Cubans knew this, but the Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, South Americans picked up on it. Like Colombia is a big time salsa nation. Like they swing hard. Those Colombians there, a lot of the sound of your Colombian style salsa comes back to the rhythms of Cuba in the 50s, in the heyday, okay, before the revolution in 1959. So you had that stuff. And what happened was that Cubans were traveling everywhere before Cuba became socialist. Um, there were people like Benny Moré, Perez Prado. And then, of course, there was a group called Sonora Matancera, and one of the lead singers in there was a lovely lady named Celia Cruz, who we call La Reina de la Salsa. Now, what ended up happening to her is that she was already popular and she was going all over the place until she ended up in New York. Now, what ended up happening is with the Great Migration happened, we had a great migration in Latin America to whereas a lot of folks from those countries ended up in New York, started families, and as opposed to having any type of like segregation type deal between the nations, in New York, everything was so crowded, everybody kind of like lived together. So they were sharing ideas and sharing rhythms and whatnot. And and through that, then you had people from like the jazz community getting involved in this. Wait, what's this music from? Oh, this is cool. Let's play. And they started feeling the rhythm and feeling the energy. So then you had American musicians participating with Hispanic, Caribbean, and South American musicians sharing ideas, doing that until eventually this concept called Latin jazz started. Now, the person who claims to have coined the term Latin jazz is a gentleman named Mario Bauza. And Mario Bauza was a prominent Cuban musician and composer who ended up immigrating to New York and spent the rest of his career there once he got there. And then next thing you know, he was incorporating people like Dizzy Gillespie, who's from North Carolina, but is probably one of the biggest Latin jazz advocates in history, and so all this stuff was happening. And at the same time with the Latin jazz, before it was called Latin jazz was called Afro-Cuban jazz because it had the Afro-Cuban rhythms with the jazz approach, which is cool. And it was even big in Cuba too, all of that. And so with all of this stuff that was happening, it caught the attention of one guy, this Italian guy who ended up becoming like a big time player in the salsa movement. His name was Jerry Masucci. And so Jerry Masucci was a big time guy, had a lot of money. He loved the music so much, he decided, with the help of another gentleman from the Dominican Republic named Johnny Pacheco, and other people like Willie Colon and Hector Lavoe. Willie Colon from Puerto Rico, New Yorican. Hector Lavoe from Puerto Rico moved to New York. They had so many rhythms that they were putting together. It's like, okay, we're going to Guaracha, we're going to Charanga, okay, we're going to Cha-Cha-Cha, we're doing this, doing that. They ended up coining the one term that makes the general public familiar with those group of actual Cuban rhythms. That was called salsa, which means sauce. So he took all those terms, threw them in one term, and bam, there it is. Right?
Mm,
Yeah. So bam, there it is. And so the term salsa became like real big in New York in the late 50s, early 60s. By the time the 70s hit, everything was salsa.
mm,
Everything was salsa. Salsa concerts was happening. By the time Celia Cruz got there, next thing you know, she's La Reina de la Salsa. She's working with all these New York musicians and being successful. Then you had other people like Mongo Santa Maria, who, anyone in the Latin jazz world would know about these group of outstanding percussionists that were coming out of Havana, Cuba, and coming into New York and doing their thing and integrating themselves with these other musicians. So, so the culture and the music developed the identity and became the rich thing that it is now. I mean, and I can go down a list of a whole lot of folks that ended up coming to New York and doing their thing because it was a lot of them. It was a lot of them.
yeah, well, the fun thing about learning about music and learning about dance is that it becomes an opportunity to think about culture, think about history, think about community, and finding these relationships between rhythms and I don't know. It's almost like it's a form of traveling, and gives you a way to have a deeper appreciation through your travels, through your engagement with different spaces, different communities. Knowing how to salsa dance, or if you can do salsa, you can do merengue. You can go to a lot of places around the world, not to mention the United States,
It's a big
and there's
deal.
going to be some salsa night somewhere,
Yeah.
some night where you can do merengue. Now that's something we haven't talked about. We didn't talk about merengue yet.
Oh, well, merengue, that is that's whenever you talk about salsa, merengue is gonna always pop up. Now we know merengue took its shape in the Dominican Republic. Okay. Um Merengue is um is a music that comes from West Africa. I gotta do some more research on to find, the actual country origins of it. But merengue is a music to whereas it when you listen to it, it has a lot of primitive connections to the continent, using tambora. And the first it was the tambora and the scraper, which they call the guira. And then next thing you know, by the time it hit the DR, the slaves were playing the music. Next thing you know, Hispanic Dominicans were listening to it, and next thing you know, they're bringing accordions and they're playing, which became, what we call merengue típica. And then as it evolved, merengue became so popular that it actually integrated itself within the whole salsa scene and the people who use the term salsa, because there were so many Dominicans in New York and in other locales within the country, okay, that love salsa, but they love merengue too. So hey, we're doing merengue. Let's go, let's go. The dance is very, very, very simple. The beat is infectious, and for a musician like me who plays trumpet, if you don't have your act together, you will not be playing music. It became that challenge. It became like the compliment, one of the musical compliments to this entire what we call Afro Latin experience. And that was the contribution that was made from the Dominican Republic to the entire scene.
Yeah, and to me, again, all these musical forms just continue to, you it's almost like opening up another path of expressing yourself,
Yes.
to engage in the different dance forms, and just to experience the relationships. Again, some of these rhythms are quite old, and I have to say too, we're talking a lot about the diaspora, but you have salsa scenes in Africa. You
Hmm.
have salsa scenes in Senegal.
Oh yeah.
There's, you have a salsa scene. You also have, and rumba, which, we
Oh
talked
yeah.
about.
That rumba.
Um, you have like Congolese rumba.
Well,
So,
I'm glad that you said that because I had an experience with that.
mhm,
So last Thursday, I was playing this gig and I was playing with a quartet, right? So I'm playing with a quartet and it's small, like kind of like what we call conjunto, which is a small group. So it's conga, piano, bass, me, right? And so we're playing and we're doing our thing. And the next thing you know, these group of guys, and I thought they were Haitians. They dance and everything. I said, okay. So I go over there and I talk to them. And I'm like, so man, where you guys from? Hey man, we're from the Congo. I said, that's two Congos, Brazzaville or Kinshasa. Kinshasa. I said, oh yeah, that's the nation that was formerly called Zaire. They're like, oh, you know that. Oh, in Kinshasa, we love salsa and we love rumba. And they got to dancing and stuff like that. And we got to talking about different artists that we liked and different approaches. And so when it came to the Congolese, and what's so interesting is that the Congo, the slaves from what we call the Congo, okay, have been very, very, very integral into the growth of Afro-Latin society throughout the entire diaspora.
and I would
Who would?
say
Mhm.
playing a big role in Black music in the diaspora in general.
Yeah,
The Congo played, uh, music from that region. I think play a really really big role, in ways that we haven't broken down
yeah,
entirely.
yeah.
Um, but well, we haven't broken down entirely, but I do break down in my lovely book, The Afrofuturist Evolution. I do
The
talk a
book,
bit
y'all. The book.
about that,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, it's so, and there's a scene in the 70s where there's a lot of Angolan, not, well, you have a lot of rumba in Angola, a lot of rumba out of the Congo. And then there was a big, really, sort of, people forget that for the Rumble in the Jungle, um, that big boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the 70s. It took place, it was in Kinshasa, in,
In Kinshasa.
what formerly called Zaire, and then the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you had, Celia Cruz, you had everyone in everyone in that whole scene, from Fania Records. They were all there.
Yes, that well, see, the group that played there, those were the Fania All Stars.
Hmm.
So the best that Fania had to offer, and that band was directed by both Johnny Pacheco
Hmm.
and Willie Colon, and it featured Celia Cruz. And
Yes.
they were a hit because at that time, salsa and Fania was extremely popular in Kinshasa. So it was a big hit and a big honor for the Congolese people to host them for that fight. Oh yeah,
Well, but you also had James Brown, and you also had
that's
BB
right.
King, and you also
Yeah,
had the musicians out of South Africa and the Congo. So it was a fascinating mix of music.
yeah.
And over the years, I always ran into different documentaries. They were so, one set of artists and not another. And then at some point, I realized, wait, all of this was happening at the same concert over the same period of days. How epic was that?
Oh yeah.
Um, so I was wondering if you could play a tune for us.
Okay.
I didn't know that Quincy and I also salsa dance together all the time. I always
Yeah.
go to his performances. He's participated in a lot of things with me, and so it's great to have a cousin who I can share these musical explorations with, and do our deep dives into the world of so much the world of music. I just want to thank you all for being amazing, for sharing with us. Remind you that this fantastic book, The Afrofuturist Evolution, is available, and you can purchase it at your favorite bookstore, or you can, check it out again on my website, which you're probably already on if you're watching this video. Uh, but nonetheless, just want to say thank you to you. Thank you to you as well. Leon, do you have three, can you name like maybe two or three albums you think people should really listen to if they're just beginning to learn a bit about the world of Latin music?
Okay. So I'm gonna give you three, and they're all from different places. So um the first one that I think that people should listen to, out of New York, is Tito Puente's Top Percussion. It's a percussion album with bass and I think some keys and some things like that. But if you really want to get the gist of like the origins of that New York sound from a percussive aspect, it's Tito Puente Top Percussion. Okay. The next one is going to be from Cuba. And that band is Eneje La Banda. And the name of that record is called Echale, Echale Limon. Echale Limon. Because that's going to point you to the cusp of the modern Cuban sound as it is today. And then for the Brazilian sound, all right, for the Brazilian sound, um, oh, there's so many. There's just so many. I mean, I would say Antonio Carlos Jobim record that you can find because they're all. Oh, matter of fact, I'll tell you what you really want to do. Sergio Mendes, Brazil '66. The song Mas Que Nada. Oh, Raiayo, Oba, Oba, Oba. So if you want to learn about the Brazilian tradition, start with that. Sergio Mendes, Brazil '66. Not guaranteed that'll put you on the path. Those three. Top
Well,
Percussion
this
Tito Puente, Echale Limon en La Banda, Sergio Mendes, Brazil '66.
great. And if people want to learn more about you and your music, what site should they go to, or where should they follow you?
They can follow me on Facebook, X known as Twitter, and Instagram, and the handle is all the same. Leon Q Allen. Leon Q is in Quincy, Allen, Allen. Also, they can go to my website, leonqallen.com. Leon Q as in Quincy, Allen, Allen.com.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Carnegie Hall, for putting this together. The joy of Latin music has given comfort to so many of us, continues to provide joy and excitement. It's just one big hug. Continue to dance, continue to engage in the music, continue to let the rhythm take you away. And thanks once again. Have a great day.
Peace, y'all.